Assalamu alaikum. My name is Moiz Uddin Siddiqui and I'm a student of MS Project Management currently studying in UMT Lahore. The topic that we are going to discuss today is experimental design research. In order to understand experimental design research, we need to understand what is a research design or a design research. A research design gives a researcher a framework of guidance which tells research methods and techniques, their implementations, their analysis, and their studies. It is a broad plan which states project objectives and provides guidance to understand those objectives. The purpose of a design research is to provide a plan of study that permits accurate assessment of cause and effect relationship between independent and dependent variables. Classic controlled experiment is an ideal example of good research design. In a broader perspective, there are two kinds of design research. One is known as qualitative design research and the other is known as quantitative design research. A qualitative design research is actually an exploratory research which explores the meaning and understanding of social behaviors. Whereas a quantitative design research is used to examine the relationship among dependent and independent variables. Speaking of quantitative design research, we can see that it has four basic types, which are descriptive design research, correlational design research, experimental design research, and quasi-experimental design research. So the topic that we are going to study today is experimental design research. In experimental design research, one or more independent variables are manipulated and applied to one or more dependent variables to measure their effect. It is basically a study based on comparisons. The effects of independent variables on dependent variables is recorded and observed for later use. Experimental design research is thus the most scientifically sophisticated research method. There are three main characteristics of experimental design research. First is randomization, second is manipulation, and third is control. So the first characteristic is randomization. Randomization generally means making something random. For example, in context of selecting a population where everyone gets equal chance of being selected. As it is stated here, the process by which individuals are drawn, that is, everybody has a known and equal chance of being drawn, and their assignment to any particular group, each individual could be assigned to any one of the groups set up, are both random. So the biggest advantage of this characteristic is that the data obtained in it is totally unbiased. In randomization, we basically use three methods, which are lottery method or slip of paper. Second is flip a coin or tossing a coin, where you flip a coin and both sides have equal chance of occurrence. And the third method is a random table, which is a table formed through random selection from a large population. The second character is manipulation. Manipulation is the process of maneuvering the intervention so that its effect on the dependent variable can be measured. It is the conscious intervention which is actually done by the researcher in case of independent variable in order to study the effect on the dependent variable. In terms of independent variable, the manipulation is known as medication, and in terms of dependent variable it is known as the pain level. For example, we can take independent variable as a medication and dependent variable as a pain level in manipulation. The third character is control. It refers to the use of control group and controlling the effects of extraneous variables on independent variable. An extraneous variable is one which is not being studied intentionally during an experiment. As we can see, it is written control refers to the use of control group and controlling the effects of extraneous variables on the independent variable in which if the researcher is interested. It refers to a group of subjects whose performance is used to evaluate the performance of experimental group. The subject in the control and experimental groups are similar in number and characteristics, but the subjects in the control group do not receive experimental treatment or any intervention. Experimental design research is classified into three types. One is true experimental design research. Second is quasi-experimental design research. And third is pre-experimental design research. The table shows the difference between the three types of experimental design research. The first difference is the presence of a control group. In pre-experimental design research, in some cases it is present, but usually it is not. In true experimental design research, a control group is always present, whereas in quasi-experimental design research, a control group is often present. There is no random selection of subjects from a population in pre-experimental design research and quasi-experimental design research, whereas in true experimental design research, random selection of subjects from a population is present. There is no random assignment of subjects to group in pre-experimental design research and quasi-experimental design research, whereas there is random assignment of subjects to group in true experimental design research. Similarly, there is no random assignment of treatments to group in pre-experimental design research and quasi-experimental design research, whereas there is a random assignment of treatments to group in true experimental design research. There is no degree of control over extraneous variables in pre-experimental design research, whereas in quasi-experimental design research there is some control over extraneous variables, whereas in true experimental design research you can completely control the extraneous variables. Now we will discuss the three types of experimental design research in detail. The first type is the true experimental design research, which is basically used to create a cause and effect relationship among variables. True experimental design is further classified into three types. First is the pre-test post-test group design. In this experiment, the researcher conducts experimental group and control group research. As you can see in the figure, the group on the top is the one which is the experimental group and is having the experimental treatment, whereas the other is the control group which is not receiving any kind of treatment. The second type is post-test only group design, where the researcher assigns participants and conducts experimental group and conduct group. The researcher conducts only the post-test study, as you can see in the figure. The third type is Solomon 4 group design, which is actually a combination of standard pre-test post-test 2 group and 2 groups of post-test design. Second type of experimental research design is quasi-experimental research design. It is just like the true experimental design, except that it does not use randomization, and such type is used when a typical research design is not practicable. The quasi-experimental design is further classified into three types. The first one is non-equivalent control group. In these experiments, the researcher conducts experimental group and control group, whereas the researcher conducts two groups without randomization. As we can see in the figure that randomization is crossed. The second type is the time series design. It is the research design in which measurement of the same variables are taken at different points of time without randomization. The third type is multiple series design. It is a type of quasi-experimental design where a series of periodic measurement is taken from units which can be experimental or control without randomization. The third type of experimental research design is the pre-experimental research design. In a pre-experimental design, either a single group or multiple groups are observed subsequent to some agent or treatment presumed to cause change. The pre-experimental research design is further classified into three types. The first type is one-shot case study. This design fails to include a control and randomization, whereas a single group is often studied but without any comparison. The second type is one group pre-test post-test. It is a type of pre-experimental design where pre-test and post-test are taken with intervention but fails to include randomization and control. The third and the last type is the static group comparison design. In these static group comparison design, there will be two groups in which one group will be given with the intervention and post-test will be given to both of the groups. And all of this process is done without randomization, as we can see in the figure. In the end, now we will discuss the advantages of experimental design research. This kind of research design helps the researchers to have a strong hold over the variables to obtain desired results. The results which are obtained through this research design are very specific, and after analyzing these results, you can apply your findings to similar ideas or situations. It helps to identify the cause and effect of a hypothesis, and thus experimental research makes an ideal starting point. Thank you for listening, and I hope it will help you.